What's the best thing about wanting to die? There's a dark and light side and everything. And the reasons to consider suicide are high pain. The pain of boredom, the pain of humiliation, the pain of shame, the pain of despair, the pain of terror, which is pain projected onto the future. Now, the times when I have wanted to die are the times when, with a candid evaluation of my life, I note that I'm in more pain than I am pleasure or well-being, one. Two, I don't anticipate it changing anytime soon. And three, I'm not exactly clear what to do about it because I've exhausted most of the culturally provided options as well as some of the things, I've explored on my own. And in the most difficult consideration of suicide was the discovery that having money, being debt-free, being able to travel anywhere that I wanted, being able to eat any food that I wanted, being able to do most of what I wanted that was available to me in terms of time was there, meaning I'd never had as much money, I'd never had as much success, I'd never had as much freedom and ability to do whatever I wanted to do, and I felt worse than I had felt at any other point in my life. I'd also never done as much healing and therapy, etc., etc. And so that creates a certain dead end. And, if you're suicidal and you're an alcoholic and you're broke and you're laying in bed and you're not doing anything and you haven't done therapy and you haven't read any books on trauma and you haven't tried eating good organic food, you haven't done yoga, you haven't written, you haven't accomplished anything, well, then there's a reasonable hypothesis to say, well, if I can get off my butt, if I can get off my butt and make some money and study, if I don't know how to make money, study books on how to make money. If I don't know how to be successful, study books on how to be successful. And there's a reasonable odds that most people who diligently study how to make money for 4 years or more learn how to make money. Most people who study time management will learn to manage their time. Most people that buy organic food and learn to cook organic food eat organic food. And so whatever it is, there's a reasonable hypothesis to say that, well, since I've never done any of those things, if I do them, I am likely to be happier. And if you've done a little bit of reading and people say, yes, that's the way it is, money will make you happy, eating well will make you happy, travel will make you happy, whatever it is will make you happy, then by all means do them. And my sense up until this point, when I wanted to die because I was in more pain, was simply to say, okay, more therapy. 6 hours a week of therapy rather than no therapy, or just 2 hours a week of therapy. Eat even nicer foods, pamper myself, this and that and the other. But the real crisis came when I realized that no matter how much money I had, it doesn't seem to be affecting my feelings. I have more time to feel lonely, depressed, frustrated, uncertain, unclear, etc. I'm bitter. I'm more bitter than I was 10 years ago. I'm more cynical than I was 10 years ago. Well, what's the obvious conclusion? In another 10 years, I will be more bitter and more cynical. I can't eat any better. I can't do more than 6 hours a week of therapy. I've tried 40 practitioners, blah, 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 blah. So, and I'm in more pain than I've ever been in. Now, this is, of course, a great reason to die. Because if you're in more pain than well-being, and there's nothing left to do, then why continue to play the game that's producing that result? So that was the idea, and that's a great question. If you're still in debt and and you haven't discovered if that's true for you, then go out and discover it, because this is not true for everyone. What I learned in retrospect was that none of my therapists knew what trauma was. So none of my therapists addressed trauma. And trauma was the core issue. And so when you've got pneumonia and you're in a hospital that cannot diagnose pneumonia, and they give you various things that are expensive and painful and tedious and take years, and your pneumonia gets worse, and there's a veiled suggestion. There's a veiled suggestion which is implied by the lack of refund, the lack of apology, the lack of referral to someone else, etc. There's a veiled suggestion on the part of the therapist that I'm doing my job right. So if you're not getting better, maybe there's something wrong with you. And this is a bit like a doctor, where you've got gangrene, you need to amputate a foot, who's giving you vitamin C, etc., and, the gangrene and, stuff is spreading up to the thigh, and, there's something wrong with you, as opposed to they don't know how to do their job. And so, that's one frame of reference. But certainly someone in the mix, if you've got a profound imbalance of some kind, someone in the mix has to know, A, what's going on, has to be able to put it into language, and has to be able to respond in a way that deals with the main issue. And that wasn't happening. So my pain was going up. But the frustration and sense of loneliness, etc., was going up even more, because all these other things weren't helping. So there was the sense of being left alone in this world where no one was dealing with the issue. So the loneliness was increasing because no one was dealing with what was going on. No one was making it their business to learn. And I didn't know what I didn't know, etc., etc. And so I did an analysis. Now, the great thing about if you're at a point where you want to die, here's your opportunity. You want to die today. Okay. But what about dying in 3 months? In other words, what if you say, okay, let's plan on dying in 3 months. Is there anything I'd like to do at all before I leave the planet? It's a long way in terms of if you believe in reincarnation or just look at the past, you had to be born with klutzy parents that didn't fully know what they were doing. You had to go through an absurd education program. You had to learn to get a job, etc., etc. You had to do a lot to get to this point where you have some degree of legal and financial freedom to do certain things that, if you start over again, it's going to take 20 years. And you're here. So, well, if you're in high school or whatever, my apologies and my commiseration. But, if you've got, credit cards that aren't totally maxed out or whatever, you're here. And the question is, is there anything at all that you'd like to do before you check out? And is there anything that you haven't tried that has reasonable hope? Meaning, you don't have to believe it'll work. It's just, if you give yourself 3 months, why not give it a try? And, I mean, you can, and there's other things to think about as well. It depends. If the suicide is about punishing other people, you probably, are not going to want to do this. But if you're wanting to, in an ethical way, round things up, the 3 months could give you a time to say goodbye. Is there a party you want to plan? Is there a, would you like to die in a particular way? Go out with a bang. Would you like a documentary made about your death? There's a variety of interesting things. In other words, this is a chance for all those agendas that have been told, we don't have enough money. What? For what? Well, we don't have enough money to make you a documentary and have you retire and pay off your debts and all that. Okay. So we're not going to pay off all the debts. We're not going to retire. So we have money for a documentary or a road trip or whatever it is. And there are a couple of things, that relate to this, but just bear with me right now. Is there anything that you want to do in the next 3 months that you haven't done yet, that dying creates an opportunity for you to do? It's really nice if you're on the last day of death, because you can say all kinds of things and make a fool of yourself and whatever, and you don't have to deal with it, the next day, in that sense of you can take risks. So you can take risks. You can focus on immediate gratification, meaning what will bring me joy in the next 3 months if you've given yourself 3 months to live. You can clean up messes, particularly if you believe in reincarnation and all that. You don't have to deal with them the next time around. You can do forgiveness, and there's a variety of things that you can do if you want to. And there's different ways of looking at suicide. If you believe you turn into a pumpkin and don't have any eternal consciousness or anything like that, then you just have to figure out, well, are you going to be in more pain alive, or would you rather be feeling nothing? Because in your paradigm, you'll be feeling nothing. If you believe in reincarnation, you have to think about, do you think the next life would be easier? Meaning, if you look around and say, well, what are my odds right now? Do you think, what are the statistical odds, for example, that you'd be born with a better shot? If you think you're going to be reborn until you figure out your challenges, what's the odds? Because, if you're speak English, in a wealthy country, able to talk without being executed, able to wear what you want to wear, able to change your job. There's a lot of countries on the planet where that's not happening. So if you say this one isn't good enough for me, it's kind of like, the teenager that's working at McDonald's and says, this is beneath me. But I haven't finished my GED, I don't have any skills, so am I really going on to a better job, or am I just going to become unemployed and feel bored and complain that I don't have any money and feel insecure? So what's the odds that I'm going to take responsibility for creating a better life? Now, if we looked at it not being physical and all that, do thoughts and emotions transcend the body? And if so, and I'm depressed and miserable and always dwell on my thoughts, then how do you know you don't just die and sit there remembering all your miserable thoughts and just be more, just be the same depressed? In other words, is it going to solve the problem? And I realize people that are in incredible amounts of pain and stuff, aren't necessarily sorting this out. I'm talking about, those of us that are actually trying to decide, is this the right thing to do? And so you've got this wonderful thing, which is you can go for it in those 3 months, meaning if you've always wanted to travel to Japan, book a flight to Japan next week. If you're losing, you're going to lose your job if you're dead, if you haven't figured that out. And so if you're going to lose your job when you're dead, just end your job now, go book a flight to Japan, and then die, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I can't lose my job, but then I'm dead, and I'm not working. So there's definitely a liberation, I would say, in the idea that dead is a pretty final choice. And that's the way I looked at it. I said, this is a final choice. So since it's taken me, 40 years to get here, where I can make this choice, let's give it a little bit of thought. And so here are a few things that I did before choosing to die. One, I built giant crystal stone water sculptures with light. I'd always wanted to do something like that. I was irritated. Nobody wanted to hire me for that. Nobody wanted, again and again and again. It's like, I'm just going to build them. I started groups. I'm bored and irritated that these groups aren't happening. Okay, I'm going to start the groups. I've written books. I did everything on my bucket list. I want to go dive through a tropical water feature. I want to paraglide. I want to hang glide. I want to skydive. I want to see all my favorite Cirque du Soleil shows in Vegas. I want to... Blah, 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 blah. So I did my bucket list and took $30,000 in about 9 months and just did it. Because, if you've got your bucket list of things to do before you die and you're going to commit suicide, well, why not do them? Death is on the horizon. And the other thing that I did was, I said, fine, okay, we can die any time now. Is there anyone there? Is everyone at peace with dying? And there was this little voice that piped up and said, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. And I said, well, you don't want to die. Why? Why do you want to live? Well, and I said, I basically put these two parts inside, these two inner voices, out on the table. I said, you talk to each other. You want to die. You don't want to die. Okay. So have a conversation. I want to die for this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. Okay? You don't want to die. So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to fix this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason? And if you can come up with some good ways to fix this, this, and this, we won't die. Is that good with you? Okay. I mean, it's very, very unnatural for a part of the global ecology to want to kill itself. Highly tormented, psychologically illiterate, chauvinistic, dehumanized human beings are one of the few things on the planet that want to die. So it's an unnatural state is what I'm getting at. Nature doesn't produce penguins that want to die. They don't commit suicide. Seals don't commit suicide. Whales don't go around committing suicide. Blue jays don't commit suicide. Human beings are very rare. And so there's something there. So you've got a natural urge to live. And then that urge has been so messed with by our culture that certain personas are fed up to the point they'd rather die than exist. Well, that's a problem created by the culture and with the collusion with the culture. And it's also a blind spot. We don't understand it because it's our cult. When you're in a cult, you do what the cult says and wants, etc. And you don't think, oh, that's a dumb cult. You think that's the only way to do it because that's how cults think. And so you understand that you're going to have to shift out of the cult in some way. If your cult has brought you to a point of suicide, be it your New Age cult or your traditional Republican cult or your Democrat cult, it doesn't matter what cult you're in. If that's brought you to the point of wanting to die, it's a fucked up cult. And if it's not doing anything about the fact that you're in so much pain you want to die, in other words, it doesn't track the data, it doesn't respond to the data, it doesn't even ask you who wants to kill themselves this week and what can we do about it, that's a fucked up cult. If you want to stop suicide, the least you can do is send out a survey once a week. How many people of you are on 1 to 10 are on a point of dying? Why? And what can we do about it? That would be a responsible cult, but we're in an insane cult that does numerous things to increase pain and then says, oh my gosh, we're so surprised that people want to die. And so, you have absurd cults and you get absurd results, namely human beings wanting to die. But the part that wants to die didn't start out that way. The part that wants to die had dreams, maybe of being seen for who they were, and those were crushed, 10,000 times. And then they had aspirations of being celebrated, perhaps, for demonstrating this skill or that talent and becoming something, and that got crushed 10,000 times. And then they had a wish for this, and then someone kept manipulating them out of that for their guilt trip. And they had a hope for having their own life, and their mother showed up, and they just got bashed down 10,000 times to the point where it's painful to even remember what they wanted in the first place because it's so fucking painful. That's what's going on for this part over here. And if we're clueless, because we've colluded with the cult and abused this part to such a degree that it has no confidence in our leadership, it says, you fucking moron, if I keep living with you at the helm, I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my life. I want to kill you because you're unreliable. You won't fight for me is what it gets down to. You collapse and do what they want you to do rather than what I want. You betray me every single time, you son of a bitch, I want to kill you. So that's what this part is thinking. Well, they've got every reason to think it, because the very fact that they're in that position means that the entire cult and you and I colluded to bring about that reality. Now, why do I say that? Because if you don't go along with that, if you say no, if you get a placard, if you say no more stupidity in this country, if you say I'm angry, I'm pissed, and I want to talk to someone about it, and you stomp up and down the street, and you say, fuck this cult that's trying to silence me, fuck this dynamic that says I should go and do therapy and hide all the abuse being done to me so that the abuser can keep doing this to someone else. Fuck that! I'm going to be visible. I'm going to break the cult rules. I'm going to take a fucking stand for a life worth living. You see, if anyone had some balls around here, this guy wouldn't be feeling so depressed and hopeless and miserable. The fact that he's depressed, hopeless, and miserable to the extent that he wants to die means that you and every chicken shit person around you isn't dealing with reality, isn't looking at this pain. And that's a cowardly, shit-faced thing to do to a very healthy part that had dreams, that had goals, that had visions, that have been crushed by cowardice and mediocrity 10,000 fucking times by everyone in the circle. You have your opportunity and you don't quite go for it because it's too scary. You have your opportunity and you feel guilty, so you let this part down again and again and again to placate some son of a bitch who's going to manipulate you as far as you can possibly go. And what does this part feel? Absolutely hopeless. Wants to die. Well, that's valid. Any healthy part of consciousness would want to get out of that type of misery. The sheer humiliation of watching one's own ego collude with this cult and abuser is depressing. So there's nothing wrong with this part for feeling depressed. There may be something wrong with you for not fighting for who you are. And even that, you could say there's nothing really wrong with you. You've gotten so much bullying. Every time you try and stand up for this part, you've just lost your nerve. You've never won that battle, perhaps. You've been raped, then you try to tell someone and you get punished for speaking out against your abuser. You know, it's a discouraging thing. And so, to some extent, you know, fuck them. Fuck them. You know, you fucking cowardice of a cult. Go out with a bang, you know, smash into the pickup truck of your abuser and, you know, bust it up and say, no, I'm not going to pretend this never happened. If that's the best you can do, fine. But also ask this part over here. You want to live. Why do you want to live? What's worth living for? Will you make a deal? What's the deal? Will you make a deal? What's the deal? The deal is, I'll live if you'll build me a giant crystal sculpture worth admiring. I'll live if you'll sit down and write the damn book that I want to be written, you know, that I want to write. I'll live if we stop worrying about what other people think and do what we believe to be beautiful. I'll live. You say, okay, do we have a deal here, right hand? Are you going to follow through with that? Because if you don't, I'm siding with this guy. You're a piece of shit, like the cult around you. You're not sticking up for what's beautiful, what's worth living for. So I'm going with him. If he'll keep his bargain. But I'll vote for the death if he doesn't. Is that a deal? Is that a deal? So I've always made deals and I've kept them. So I'm still here. And the interesting thing for me in this dynamic is understanding that every time I've made a deal like that, my life has gotten significantly better. Now, this is why I say suicide is an opportunity from a certain frame of reference. And it's good to confront rather than prolong in an endless mediocrity of addiction and avoidance, etc. So if you face it, and you're going along at incremental improvement, and it's not good enough. For who? The part of you that wants to die, of course. If you're doing a great job of shepherding and leading and inspiring the most important parts of your soul, they are excited to be alive, to breathe, to create. That's our nature. If you're doing such a crappy job that part of you wants to die, then the little incremental improvements or plateauing or drifting downhill isn't good enough for them. Some part of you has got standards, and the other part of you isn't living up to them. Well, this is a fabulous opportunity. So I would say that right after these bargains, which take an hour, by the way, it's not like this month-long drawn out, I want to die. There's no question about it. Why? I'm in more pain than pleasure, and I'm not anticipating that changing anytime soon, if at all. Makes sense to me. Okay, we're going to die. Anyone else in there want to talk? Okay. What's your idea? What are you willing to give this part so that they want to live? I'll go with the majority vote. That's how deals get made. You want to die, you want to live. Okay. I'm the deciding vote. Who gets to decide? Well, someone has to give up some of their measly, status quo myopia, same old crap. Has to give some of that up and become something worth living. then you've got a majority vote, I'll back it. So big growth spurts have come, like my bucket list. Doing the whole bucket list thing, that was not my plan. It's just like, I got to do something. What am I going to do? Let's do this. What's the worst case scenario if I do all my bucket list in 1 year? I go bankrupt. What's the worst case scenario if I don't do my bucket list and continue being bitter and resentful for the rest of my life? I become someone I hate being more and more, and I can't stand it. Okay, which is worse? Going bankrupt or not being able to stand myself? You know, what does the world need? People with more money, or people who like themselves and embody their dreams? You know, and so this is the dialogue. It takes a little bit of time, but the key thing is suicide is a doorway, can be a doorway into changing the set. You can go live in Vietnam. Now you may say, what am I? Go there and find out. You can go live in Thailand. You can teach English as a second language in a country where things actually matter, where you can help someone. You can find real, meaningful, emotional connection in other cultures. I have. You can invest in a business in a third world, put in a well that actually brings joy to people's faces and gives a sense of meaning. There's many things. You can jump out of a plane. You can go to every strip joint you can imagine. Be honest about what you want. Go for it until you get the votes to live. Don't create so much misery and pain that most of you wants to die, and then blindside yourself and deny and insult that part by pretending not to feel that way and looking the other way like a coward. If you've insulted yourself to such an extent that it can't stand being in your own body, face it and learn. Have the guts to be the king, the queen. And the definition of kingship and queenship is that which is, that has the seat of power, which is the one that chooses, that which has the seat of power to act, serves that which is most helpless, that which cannot act. So it's your adult serving your inner child. It's your adult protecting your adolescent, being a friend to the adolescent. It's your powerful part being a champion for your helpless part. Be a fucking king. Be a queen. Show leadership by showing balls, by taking a stand for that which is most vulnerable, most needy, most unloved, most terrified, most traumatized in you. And if that ever gets boring, or you manage the Herculean task of transcending all of your inner wounds, you will have already mastered the technique, the technology to do the same thing at a grander scale. As you, emerging brilliant from that transformation, can take a stand for the homeless people in your town, can take a stand for someone you care about who doesn't deserve to be treated that way in the outer world. You will never be bored for the rest of your life. You are creating love. When you meet your own human needs, survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing one's inner gifts, bringing them out into the world, developing the transcendent vision mind, and transcending the human ego, you are becoming a superhuman being. You're becoming fully human, realized, actualized, and it's fun. And once you do that for yourself, the most enjoyable thing and the most loving thing, and they're the same thing, it's fun to help someone else, to mentor someone else in that same dynamic. So go do it. There's a billion people that can use a mentor, that can use a leadership, that can stand up for something beautiful. Every time I faced this question, my life has lifted. And I'm pleased to be alive at this point. And every time the pain lifts and grows or creeps up on me, it's a reminder of the grayscale of life, that what was good enough yesterday is no longer good enough today, because it's our nature to become more. That what medicated my pain 2 years ago isn't a strong enough drug to medicate my pain today. I need something purer. What's the greatest transcendent healer of all addiction? It's connection with the divine. It is the transcendent doorway to a consciousness and a way of being that moves through the power of the human ego into a more transcendent state, into moving beyond the self, not by leaving the self behind, but by saying, I've done for my ego. I've created the security financially and physically and da-da-da. I've created the love and belonging, etc. for my ego. I'm not abandoning this ego that needs love and belonging, that needs a sense of self-esteem, that needs security. I'm not abandoning that. I'm working on that. And having done that, without abandoning that, I'm now bringing that outward into the world. It's an enjoyable journey with an endless amount of creative challenge. And if we give of ourselves in that challenge, we open to a truth, to a doorway of our relationship with a bigger part of ourselves as part of the larger ecology of our species, of our planet, of our physicality, of our universe, to be a part of something bigger. And that is the healing. Not necessarily culture. Cultures are generally toxic at high doses. But something bigger, something more beautiful, something more transcendent. Be it with meditation, be it with walks in nature, be it with art, be it with creativity. Something beautiful. Something beautiful. And that pain can be a guide and can be a motivator. If the pain gets too high and you're stuck in your little paradigm and your little thing where I'm not going to do this and no one's going to tell me what to do, and the pain jumps up to an 8. I got to get off my butt and do something. I got to do something now, or I blow the lifetime. So this has been my journey with suicide, and one key thing that's hard to tolerate for humans is helplessness. And on that line, I'd say create plan A, B, and C, and D. I remember at 14, I was listening to the hellish noise of my parents' divorce deteriorating outside my bedroom door, and I wanted to die. And so I got out survival books at the library. I studied what plants I could eat out in the Vancouver area. We were up in Vancouver at the time. And so in that redwood forest and stuff, like what could I eat? What could I hunt? I got a bow and arrow. I packed a survival kit. I developed designs for tree forts. And on a daily basis, I evaluated, was it worth the hassle? Because I wasn't Pollyanna. I knew I'd be wet. I knew I'd be cold. I knew I couldn't charge charge a cell phone or anything. They didn't even have cell phones back then, but I couldn't do this and that and the other. And when I was 14 years, I couldn't listen to my radio and stuff. So I'd say, okay, maybe I could wear earphones. Maybe I could get, full ear covering phones and block out the family news noise and keep the door locked. And then maybe that was an easier route, and just not look too closely as I left my room, etc. Maybe that was easier. But I was ready. I was ready if I need to go and leave. To evade, you have to evade the police when you leave like that, because our culture is too dumb to understand the psychology of a heartbroken teenage boy dealing with divorce at home. When you have your own police force sending you back into trauma, into suicidal hell, when they can't keep you from killing yourself, they can just send you back to your abusers. Well, dumb cults get dumb results, like suicides in our culture. But in this dynamic, could I evade the police, etc.? Where would I have to go? You realize it's quite a big algorithm of problems to figure out. But the very fact that I can go in a couple of hours creates a sense of control, which deletes the helplessness, which gives a sense of self-esteem, of empowerment. And that's why I want to encourage plans A, B, C, and D. Have a plan to die. Helium, just off-the-cuff tip, helium is one of the best. Get some helium. Have a plan to die. But also have plans that would be more fun than dying. And have the guts. I mean, if you have the guts to kill yourself, it takes a fair amount of guts because you don't know what's on the other side. Things could be worse. All your worst relatives could be waiting for you on the other side. You have no idea if it's better or worse. It takes a lot of guts to go into that unknown. Doing something as a plan A, B, and C, find the guts to do that and use the rationale. Because, people say things like, I remember even at one point when I felt so miserable and I didn't want to let my clients down. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, if I die, do you think, how are my clients' jobs going to be finished? If I was a client, would I rather me die and have to get a new contractor, or would I rather me delay a month? A month is much easier. And so I just told three clients, the 3 clients that would be affected, I have a family emergency. Who's the family? Me. I'm my own family. There is an emergency. I've got to do something fast or I'm going to die. So I was clear it's in the client's interest not to be left without anything. I was clear it's in my interest. Not, if all it takes is a month vacation and then I don't want to die, well, that's a pretty intelligent vacation, money well spent. And so if you can think clearly about this rather than this cult's horrible taboo about the topic, and better yet, if you can have a friend who will sort through and actually take some interest in the dynamic rather than just judging and making you feel rotten so that they can feel better about themselves, a cowardly act in a cowardly cult, then, perhaps you can turn this into an opportunity. So in summary, give yourself 3 months. 2, take it seriously, have a conversation, and make the changes. Make the changes. Learn from the pain. Understand the cult and all of its thing. This is not all your fault. At the same time, precisely because we're in a psychologically illiterate culture, precisely because we're in a largely sociopathic culture, if you don't figure out a problem, you can't count on someone else to figure out a problem. In fact, some people will make it worse. You tell them you're going to want to die because you're in a lot of pain, and they add 10 to 20 units of pain onto your shoulder without even learning the difference between what brings you joy and what brings you pain. So you get dumped on at your most vulnerable moment. Well, that's just the result of a psychologically illiterate culture, of an emotionally illiterate culture that doesn't teach anything about suicide, whose solution to making life so miserable that its own people want to die is to make death illegal. That's like saying that the food at the restaurant is so terrible that hungry people don't want to eat. So rather than getting a good cook and improving the food so people want to eat, they pass a law to say it's illegal not to eat everything on your plate. Well, that's what our cult has done with death. It's made a culture that produces noticeable percentages of people who think about dying and want to die and even kill themselves, one. And two, rather than doing anything about that culture, makes them criminals for having the audacity, for stepping up and walking away from a game that is so lousy, they'd rather go into oblivion than play it. That's a fucked up game. That's not your fault. But in a fucked up cult, if you don't do something about it, probably no one else will. Because they were raised in the cult as well, and no one taught them about it either. So good luck as you face this terrain, and I will continue in my dance with grief, with trauma, with pain, with loneliness, with joy, with healing, with growth, etc. I will continue to evaluate until my death. We will all die in the end. When and how that is, to the degree that we have the ability to influence the timing and manner of our death, make it beautiful. That's my goal.